Well, this is new video into us from Kyiv. The city's air defenses worked for 8 hours overnight to repel a barrage of several waves of Russian attacks. Ukrainian officials say hundreds of drones struck several cities across the country. It's the latest in a series of large-scale Russian aerial attacks on Ukraine in recent weeks. Crystal Gomansing is in our London bureau tracking the latest. So, Crystal, what more can you tell us about this latest attack and the aftermath?
Well, Anita, the strikes last night are being described as some of the heaviest bombardments since Russia's full-scale invasion began. There were a number of drones, hundreds of drones. In fact, Ukraine's air defense saying 550 air threats were logged, more than 330 drones, plus ballistic missiles. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky writing on social media that air alerts warning people of the potential danger just ended for the capital around 9 a.m. And there were those drone strikes. And this is images of one that actually was captured and posted on social media. A really horrifying moment. The sounds of buzzing drones continued all night, according to Ukrainians. The sound of gunfire also could be heard. That's air defense units trying to shoot those drones down in an effort to protect people.
Yeah, and the aerial blitz certainly seems to be continuing at full pace. So, Wolf, what we've heard overnight is that more than 400 drones and missiles were launched by the Russians. Most of them drones. It really seems as though the Russians are drastically increasing and expanding their drone campaign against Ukrainian cities. First and foremost, of course, the capital, Kyiv. You guys were just showing some of the pictures that we saw from last night, and that almost belies the situation that actually happened there on the ground. Folks that we've been speaking to saying that the air raid sirens were on for about 8 hours overnight, and they could hear those drones buzzing over the Ukrainian capital, some of them obviously landing in residential buildings as well. There was one of our producers who was on the scene at one of those buildings where a person said that a drone had hit an apartment near him, and he was only able to get out of his own house by breaking down the door.
We see the increasing intensity and volume of Russian drone attacks into Ukraine. What we're also seeing is the utilitarian nature of the Shahed Geran drone is absolutely invaluable to the modern military. So much so, every nation on Earth at this point is basically copying it. The troubles it's causing in Ukraine it's a story unto itself, and one that the war zone has definitely been covering. Ukraine scrambling to fight against growing Russian Shahed 136 threat. Ukraine is frantically working to cope with increasing Russian Shahed 136 drone attacks that feature evolved tactics and capabilities. And like I said, what we're seeing is an increase in intensity and volume in the attacks Russia is mounting on Ukraine using the Shahed 136 or Geran 2. And the Russians will tell you that the Geran is, although physically similar, has evolved into something completely new. This is from one of the latest attacks. This shows the map of the Russian launch points and the majority of impact points throughout Ukraine. And the volume is something that has to be continually brought up. And the ever-evolving tactics. The problem is not that the Ukraine air defense is getting worse. Instead, what we see is a new swarming tactics, and drones are now flying in higher altitude, which makes them more effective. So we have evolving tactics, swarming tactics, and those swarming tactics are really only possible because of an increase in production. The Russians have a full-on license for the Shahed 136, and they have evolved it to what they call the Geran 2. Making matters worse for Ukraine, Russia is drastically increasing the number of drones it is producing. As we previously noted, while Russia initially relied on Iran to supply its Shaheds, it now produces its own at the rate of over 2,000 per month, with plans to nearly triple that in the not-too-distant future. And the Russians have released a video showing the construction of and the manufacture of these Geran 2 drones. Let's show you. A production facility such as that is certainly going to be capable of pumping out a whole bunch of those drones. And reportedly, that's just one of a few different drone production facilities now going online to reach that 2,000 drone per month status. The drones are also evolving. The Shahed 136, the Geran 2, is now completely evolving. Further information has been released regarding the downed Shahed 136 with imaging, guidance, and AI capabilities. Details of materials and electronic components indicate Iranian fabrication. The camera is an analog thermal imager for both reconnaissance and terrain following. That's a good picture of that. And when we follow the link on X, we go through and we find out a bunch of interesting stuff about the evolution of the Shaheds. The NVIDIA Jetson Orin AI board is specialized for both video processing tasks and AI. Information from the camera is compared to stored models to select a target in autonomous mode, or stored maps of terrain following. Each system is intended to defeat Ukrainian GPS jamming. Another jam-resistant component is the CRPA satellite navigation system. In this sample, a 4-element antenna connected to the Iranian Nessar GPS. This system is capable of receiving satellite signals in both L1 and accurate L5 bands. So the complexity and the technology of these is growing. A radio modem and VHF subsystem for video transmission and telemetry allows direct operator control up to 150 kilometers. With a radio repeater, UAV operator can control an extended 220 kilometers. In autonomous mode, the range is more than 1,000 kilometers. I remember when the Shahed was first seen in combat, it was basically ridiculed and laughed at. Now, it is basically becoming the standard for low-cost munition delivery by drone, except for FPV. This is more your long-range intermediate, but I remember it being laughed at. Now, the U.S. military-industrial complex is finally catching up to the Shahed-type drone can bring to the table, thus far, though far later than it should have. Last week, 18 American-made drone prototypes were put on display at the Pentagon. It was part of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's move to increase U.S. domestic drone production. Among them was one called Low-Cost Uncrewed Combat Attack System, or LUCAS drone, a delta-wing weapon closely resembling the Shahed. This is from Spectre. This is from the actual company building it, Spectre Works. American Shahed 136 has half the range, speed, and warhead compared to the Iranian original. Now, I expect this to completely evolve over time, but this is from Spectre Works, and these are the statistics that you need to know for the American version of the Shahed. FLM 136 or whatever they're going to call it, I don't know. But this is the report out of the Eurasian Times. Shocking replica of Iranian UAV is U.S. low-cost, high-impact LUCAS derived from Shahed 136 drone. In July, the Pentagon showcased the low-cost, uncrewed combat attack system, or LUCAS, a response to global kamikaze drone threats designed by Spectre Works for Indo-Pacific operations. Indo-Pacific operations. That's important. But that's clearly the same thing, virtually. And I want to bring this up because it was funny to me. The U.S. has created a new kamikaze drone surprisingly looks similar to the Iranian Shahed 136. The Shahed Geran 2 is $30,000 apiece. I bet this one goes for $500,000. I guess that's why you spend $1 trillion on defense. You know, it's really hard to argue with that. It's really hard to argue with that. That might actually be the case, because that's what the defense industry does. With all that said, this new Shahed 136 Geran 2 drone, and now being adopted by virtually every single country on Earth, and the use of that Spectre model for the Indo-Pacific, I think it becomes incumbent upon us to now look at the latest development of these drones in Ukraine. New Russian drone made completely of Chinese components, Ukrainian intelligence reports. The discovery of a Russian decoy drone made up entirely of Chinese parts is another indication of the growing wartime relationship between Moscow and Beijing. If the drone is made up completely of Chinese components, what would it take for the Chinese to manufacture something like this? Let's go back to that drone factory image. Can you imagine a couple of these being set up in China? What would those numbers be? Well, I decided to run those numbers, and I want to bring them to you now. Geran 2 Shahed 136 production, as currently stated, is 175 to 200 a day in Russia, equaling 63,875 to 73,000 annually. That's relevant because you have the Russians really amping it up, wanting to do 1,000 drone raids. Like back in the day in World War II, the 1,000 bomber raids were psychologically very impactful for the Allies, both negatively for the enemy and positively for the Allies. And it was just a show of force, and the number 1,000 is something else. So they will be able to do 1,000 drone raids. But let's look at the Chinese numbers, and I'm going to do this times 3. The reason I'm doing that is because if you look at the Chinese FPV drone numbers, and this isn't just a number I pulled randomly, reports of Chinese FPV drone construction in the hundreds of thousands is widely known. China can already produce 500,000 FPV drones monthly and up to 700,000 in wartime. The PLA has conducted 3 large-scale military exercises using the power of drone swarms, which is a key topic of discussion between U.S. foreign partners and American officials at a forum in Singapore last week, media reports said. This is the video of Chinese drone swarms. I want you to hear the audio because I find this incredibly frightening. The FPV drone has changed the modern battlefield. The Russians are expected to make 2 million of them, according to reports out of Kyiv. The Chinese can make millions of them. Using the times 3, Chinese monthly FPV production would lead to 6 million to 9 million yearly. Using the times 3, estimates of Chinese Geran 2 or Shahed 136 production would be 525 to 600 per day, with 191,625 to 219,000 annually. Those numbers are significant if you're in Taiwan. We saw the range numbers of the Shahed 136 of over 1,000 kilometers autonomously. We saw that with operators and repeaters, we can now get the range to 220 kilometers, which is a substantial distance, which would be just enough to inundate Taipei with Shahed 136 or Geran 2 or whatever the Chinese version of that would be. And, you know, the Russians may have a license production deal with China, with Iran, but I doubt that the Chinese will go out of their way to have any kind of production deal with anybody. They'll just make them. As we know, China isn't very fond of copyright or anything like that, so
the Chinese are very good at this sort of thing. I'm speaking to you now from behind a pair of fake Ray-Bans, wearing a fake Armani jacket, carrying a fake Louis Vuitton bag, in which we find a fake iPad and a fake iPhone. And if we consult my fake Omega, we see that it's 25 to 3, probably, which means it's time to pop into the fake Starbucks over there for a cup of fake coffee. It seems then that the expression copyright infringement doesn't translate terribly well into Mandarin.
So I highly doubt that we're going to have any kind of Chinese reciprocation when it comes to wanting a license or anything like that. They'll just make them. And finding one completely made out of Chinese components, incredibly troubling. Incredibly troubling. And all these components, most of these components, as is pointed out in this article, were all available on Alibaba. All available online. It goes through quite thoroughly. This is also Chinese working on Russian drones say they now have 50-kilometer fiber optic cables. Soon, they'll have fiber optic cables large enough to go across the Taiwan Strait. Not that China's working on that. But you have the Shahed 136 drone now being produced in vast numbers. So vast that the United States has finally had to take a firm look at making something like that for itself. Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. And the Russians being able to do 1,000 drone raids on Kyiv is just the start. You could have 10,000 drone raids on Taipei if the Chinese were to get into the manufacture. Just look at the numbers. The numbers don't lie. And that's just annually. If they were to stockpile a year or two, the destruction would be incredible, even if over half of them, because the Ukrainians claim to shoot down over half of them. I don't doubt it. These are slow flying aircraft, easy to hit. There's many videos online of online AAA systems shooting them down. There's teams that go out with what looks like the equivalent of the MG-42 and hunt these things down. So they can be brought down quite easily. But the Russians are going with the traditional Russian tactic of quantity has a quality all its own. And I think the Chinese will be paying very close attention to that. So the Shahed 136. Who knew? If you liked the video, hit like, subscribe, share with a friend, let them know. The Ukrainians, they're scrambling. They're scrambling. The Russians are building production of drones, now made with completely Chinese-made components, telling you that if the Chinese wanted to make them, they could do it in numbers that would be terrifying. absolutely terrifying. I thank you. I appreciate you.